Okay, I have been doing photography along railroads for a long, long time, shooting large format mostly, um, and antique tractors, and those are some of the cameras I use. And that's me with my, well, I'm going to be shooting a project with that in the next month or so. So this is the type of stuff I like doing. And of course, Porter County Railroads. Um, Everything that came out of Chicago and came from the East Coast went through Porter County. And if you can see my cursor here, this is where we are. The first railroad that went through was the Michigan Central in 1852. And then the next one was the Chicago, and I'm sorry, the Chicago, I can't even read that. Chicago Railroad, that's what that is. That was the Pennsy because it goes to Warsaw. And then every other railroad started to follow. Pennsy came through in 1859, another old map of getting to Chicago. This is Valparaiso and Porter County, the green map, with everything coming out of Chicago, going at a diagonal through Porter County. Michigan Central, the New York Central, the Wabash. Which one is this one? Woodville. Oh, the B&O. In Valpo here, we had the Pennsy, the nickel plate, and the Grand Trunk is this one here. And the Pennsy, the Grand Trunk. Further south, we had the Pennsy again, the Erie. And at the bottom of this page, I don't have anything of that, but it's a Cincinnati and Chicago. I have no photographs of that. That went through Couts. That, and here it is again with the C&O through the state, the B&O through the state. Now, a lot of these railroads that went through Porter County didn't do anything except go through Porter County. They had no businesses along the right of way. Some of them didn't even have stations. Well, they had stations, but passenger service was iffy. They might not even stop there. Some of the locals that came through would stop there at some of the little towns, but for the most part, it was blast through Porter County, all 14 or 18 miles of the width of the thing. Here's the Pennsy. That's my railroad in Indiana. And the Erie, again, it doesn't do much, just goes straight through. Wabash. The Wabash went through Westville. And when I started my business, I was going to UPS at Westville quite often. Um, and every once in a while, the flashers would go and they would be blinking, and there was never a train to be seen. Ever. They shorted out the circuits. Here's another, this is the Pennsy here. Pennsy had an interesting thing. They went from Cincinnati basically up to Mackinac City on the Grand Rapids in Indiana. And some people have often said that they wonder if management in Philadelphia knew that railroad even existed. Another shot of northern Indiana. This is 1865. The B&O, oh, here, and here is Valpo. Now, Valpo has a very unusual thing going on here. You have the Pennsylvania Railroad coming through the city. You have the Grand Trunk Railroad or it was called the Peninsula Railroad at the time. It came through and stopped just west of my street here, um, and went and made this great big loop in town, going downhill to meet the Pennsy. That's where they interchanged. The rough right of way is still visible in some areas, and I'll show you when I come to the Grand Trunk Railroad what that is like. Here is, I'll start with the trunk. Typical Mikado, lots of these ran through Valpo all the time. I'm going to zoom through these things and go pretty fast so you can sit back and relax and just look. Alco and Montreal Locomotive Works built streamlined engines on the trunk. The difference between the two railroads was this air intake on the top. On one of them, the bars are vertical, and on the American-made ones, they're horizontal. This is the vertical one, and then the American-made ones were horizontal. So that's how you could tell the two manufacturers apart. This is Sedley Grade. This is coming uphill towards the Lafayette Street, up the road here. It's taken from Campbell Street Bridge. It was typically it's 1.8% grade on it. There were areas that were actually 4.5 to 5, short areas a couple hundred yards long, and that used to cause all sorts of problems. They straightened that out many years ago and evened it out. And nowadays they use pushers on it and mid-train helpers. This is Valpo with the water tank in the background at the depot. Picture of Valpo again. Train coming into the depot well, actually, it looks like he stopped because there's a guy standing there. So he may be waiting before the street, not crossing the road, Camp Calumet. The standpipe here, the base of the standpipe got ripped out about 10 years ago, and I wish I had gotten the flange off of it, but I couldn't lift it. It just, God, that thing was heavy. And this is also another neat thing. There was a standpipe down here. Make sure you block the road. That was the important thing, I think, for the Grand Trunk. The train would come in, and he would go over here and park in front of the thing and put water in, and he would be blocking Calumet Street. I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. The freight house got torn down about 25 years ago, maybe 30 now. I got some Fairbanks Morse weights from the scale out of it. When they tore it down, they really crunched it. They didn't care about anything inside. They didn't disassemble it. They just went at it with a backhoe, and down it came. That's blasting out underneath the Campbell Street Bridge. That's been rebuilt, but it still uses the same uprights, which is interesting. They put concrete slab sides on it and reinforced it a little bit, but it's still the same hill and everything. One of the unstreamlined Northerns. This was a wreck on the interchange between the Pennsy and the Grand Trunk on the west side of town at 250 West, Tower Road. It was controlled by the Grand Trunk because the Grand Trunk was the last railroad to be put out there. And there's an interchange between the Pennsy and the Grand Trunk of about, I think about 10 cars. And somebody clobbered into them and just knocked everything off. And here's 5629. Does that ring a bell? That was a fan engine, a rail fan engine that they ran that was owned by Dick Jensen that got cut up over Blue Island about 40 years ago. And this is Sedley Grade again. When there were not any weeds on it and they did weed service, they used to burn this. One of the really old engines from the 1870s and 1880s. Sedley had a small town, very small, more of a village. They had a general store. They had the depot there. And this is where the Grand Trunk goes to Valpo. It becomes single track, and then it became double track at Sedley. And it is still single track through Valpo. They've been talked about making it double track for years, and it has not happened yet. Oh, here we've got some nickel plate coming through Valpo. This was taken by a friend of mine, Paul Del Mastro, in 58, or I'm sorry, 57, I believe. One of their refrigerated express trains. New York Central, that's not Porter County. I'm not sure where that is. Valpo on the Pennsylvania Railroad. This is Joliet Bridge, also known as the Lincoln Highway Bridge. The steel work's still there, the concrete's still there, but it has been, again, it's been modernized somewhat. There's a gas station on the hill here, and they came in with a fuel tank, and they pumped the fuel into the tanks here, and then they pumped it up the hill or up the hill here to the gas pumps. So that's an interesting little business that they had. You had the siding here that, or that was a siding. Had a siding here that went down to just about where the bridge is. Came in, the commuter train would come in here and park on that line. This is the number 2, this is number 1. Then you had this line here, which is the original, this is the original Grand Trunk interchange line. After they completed and went through the hills out there, this just became a siding for the freight depot. That's the Pennsy. More Pennsy. This is building. This building is still here. This is the old McGill building, the original McGill building. They started out as a bronze foundry, and then they went into making electrical components and then bearings and all sorts of stuff. The business is still in business. It's just not all in one spot anymore. This is out by, it's on the west side or east side of town. That's the Broadway with double heading K4s on it. And this is Valpo at the Roundhouse, and the you see the ash rake here and the ash pick and all the tools that the hostlers would use to clean up the boiler or clean up the firebox of the boiler or the engine. coast to coast tender on an M class engine, almost as big as the engine itself. I'm not sure if this is an Otto Perry shot or not. Otto Perry was a photographer who lived in New Mexico and traveled all over the country on his vacations, taking train pictures and swapping train pictures with other rail enthusiasts. The camera he shot with, I don't think was capable of doing that, of panning nicely like that. Because I've only seen one shot, and this was in a pile of Otto Perry photographs that I got. And I'm kind of hesitant to say it actually is his or not. I have a lot of his in here though. Like this one. This is an Otto Perry shot. This is taken from the Valparaiso University Kissing Bridge. Um, it went across the tracks, and if you stood in the middle of the bridge and the train went by, you had to kiss your girlfriend you were with. And the Wabash in somewhere around here. I'm not sure where. Like I said, I never got pictures of the Wabash myself, and they're kind of scarce taken in Porter County. Okay, now let's get out of here and start with okay, Baltimore and Ohio, 1860, I believe.
We're still seeing the Wabash engine.
Oh, are you? Okay,
Yep.
hold on. What are you seeing now?
Same thing, Wabash.
Gone?
Yep, now you're not sharing anymore.
Okay. Oh, look at you guys.
Welcome, Bob and JE, whoever you are.
How about now?
Yep, now we're good.
Okay, Baltimore and Ohio, 1860 something came through. This is a very interesting picture because it's the only one I've got and only one I've seen of the B&O wreck at Woodville. Woodville was a place on the B&O where the Valparaiso Northern crossed over on a bridge, the B&O train or B&O tracks. And this is Suman, which is just down the road from Woodville. If you recall, not too long ago in Porter County, there was a derailment up at Suman again 2 summers ago, I believe. And there's something about the curvature up there. There's something about the track geometry that they put trains on the ground.
A very interesting baggage car. A very interesting baggage car.
It is, isn't it?
with little windows.
Okay, this is the nickel plate in Valpo. It was built in some sections to be two tracks wide, and you can see how wide it is there because there is a second track. The second track used to go down to the ice house on Seggers Lake. Seggers Lake now is famous because the Lake of the Woods community lives there year round. It's a nudist colony. And yeah, the ice house was there for, oh my gosh, a long, long time. They supplied ice to Chicago, to the Chicago ice houses up until about July of each year from the lake. The building here is the old freight house. It's long gone. You can see it's super elevated, and you can just visualize nickel plate trains coming through here at speed because they didn't hold back. Often the distance here behind or farther east of the freight house, this building here was part of the, as they used to call it in Valpo, the stockyards. It wasn't a stockyards, it was a hog cooling facility where they would bring stock cars in full of pigs, let them loose in this facility, and turn the sprinklers on and cool them off before they got to Chicago, so they didn't die. A lot of towns had them. A lot of towns called them stockyards. It wasn't. It
Yep.
was simply a way of getting the animals healthy for the market.
Ken, what's interesting also about
Keeping
that
them
picture, what's interesting about that picture, Ken, if you go back to that one, is that it's super elevated curve, but that turnout is at the worst possible part of a super elevated curve. That would be very difficult to attempt on a model railroad.
Your car would just rock over that, you know. Yeah, I can imagine that would be a heavily derailed spot. The nickel plate wasn't lost on fans. Towards the end of the steam runs, they ran several fan trips in the summer months before the diesels took over 100%. This is one of my favorite pictures of all. A guy by the name of Jim Neff, who's a friend of mine, his dad was the station manager here. The nickel plate, or the Norfolk Western, was willing to give our train club the building if we could get rid of it or to move it. They didn't want it next door to the tracks. And the price to move and the price of land just exceeded everyone's idea of money. Okay, this was in Chesterton on the New York Central, and they put it on the ground. As you can see how far the engine went.
Wow.
When I think of Chicago, for a long time, I thought of the New York Central, probably because I had this postcard when I was a little kid that just seemed to be New York Central. Real famous accident here. This is in Porter. The Michigan Central and the New York Central met on a crossing there, and obviously somebody missed the signal and clobbered them.
Ouch.
Yeah, I can't remember how many people were killed, but it was in the 20s or 30s.
That's a lot of cross arms on that phone pole in the
Yeah, it
background.
sure is.
There are. Can you imagine modeling something like that? Gosh,
Unthinkable.
yeah. The yellow line here represents the line that crossed where the trains hit. And this is a shadow of itself now. Okay. I wish Seth was here because he knows this. He grew up in Chesterton. This is the CNO, the Pierre Marquette here. This is the Michigan Central behind the train or behind the depot or tower. And then there was a set of crossovers here. And then there was this siding here that went down. And over here, there was Chicago pneumatic brick, where they use air pressure to mold the bricks. That's why it was called pneumatic brick. But it was a very busy place at one point. There was a spot on the other side of the crossing where you could still see the earth had been moved from the accident. This is Woodville. It's where the B&O and the Valparaiso Northern crossed over the railroad. Calumet here crossed over the railroad, and the Valparaiso Northern merged into the highway and ran along the side of it. This is opening day in our town of the streetcar line. Building here is still up. It's an apartment complex. Much like a Chicago one, it's hollow in the backside, and there are giant balconies made out of wood in the back. So you ever come into town, you go down the alley here, you're liable to think you're in Chicago. This finally got removed about 25 or 30 years ago. Some of these posts were still up in the creek there. This is downtown. This building is here. These guys are gone. This building here behind the thing was called the Blood and Guts. It was a movie theater, and the old bike shop was here, and this would dead end right up the street here, another 20 yards at Lincoln Way, and then they would switch the poles around and head back. It went up to Chesterton until 1914, and then it stopped at Woodville and ran to Garrington. And you can follow it in Garrington a few places, or I should say, what's it called? Lake Central, not Lake Central. Help me, Greg.
I don't know. I've heard of Garyton, but I'm not sure.
It used to be East Gary.
Oh, you talking about Lake Station?
Thank you. Lake Station. Yes. And at the Dairy Queen at Lake Station, it used to be a sign that says, "Do not block road." And it was because the streetcar used to go through there. And it ran behind Central Avenue in Lake Station. It ran the right of ways, the alley behind it.
Yeah, that sign's still there.
Is it? Oh, cool. Okay. That was a diner, and it's made out of one of the old Gary Railway cars that they brought in on its wheels and rolled it down the street and took the wheels out, lowered it down, and put it in place, and it sat there for a long time. I was there when I was a kid and moved to Indiana in 1965, and I think that same year it had a fire and burned down. This building is still there. It's a bank building. But yeah, it was, some of the stuff did get used again. A double-ended Coolman car. I gave it to the museum in town here. I have brake shoes from this car that I gave. They were flanged brake shoes, all steel, and I can't imagine how bad they would wear the flange out. I don't know why they did it, but they did it. But they did. This is the interchange between the Calumet Road, the Valparaiso Northern. It went across 3 diamonds. There's an interchange track between the Valparaiso Northern and for the overhead wire. The interchange was done because the Valparaiso Water Department needed coal for the Flint Lake pumping station. It was a coal-fired pump house that would pump water up into the water tank and into 2 or 3 stationary, or not stationary, 2 or 3 ground tanks that were there. And then it would go down to Valpo because it was a downhill run. Every once in a while, like about every week, they would take a Grand Trunk switcher and they would run it with a couple of cars of coal up to Flint Lake. So they ran steam on Calumet Avenue. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. Again, opening day on the line. There was an electric trolley park up the road, up by Flint Lake, that was there for a while. This is the Pensy in town, the Valpo Depot, which of course was the Pittsburgh, Fort Wayne, and Western, PFW, I'm sorry, Pittsburgh, Fort Wayne, and Chicago, PFWC. The depot got burned down 30 years ago, I guess, by now. But it originally had a lot of gingerbread, had this really, really neat attached awning that the trains would actually come up and get switched over and come in on. This day, I believe it was because there were people going to war and they were seeing them off. Our Russian contingent of women here with the babushkas. You could see that interchange really got piled up when they hit. This is Franklin Street coming south. The tracks end right there. And this sign, bits and pieces of it remain on the brick. They have taken off the not drive it. Is it drive it? That styrofoam coating that they put stucco over.
Yeah, I think so.
They did that to this building, and it looked awful. And then a guy bought it, and he's got something going on in there now. The floor has reverse swastikas on the floor. And of course, a reverse swastika is an Indian symbol. It's not Nazi, it's Indian, and it means peace. And so people were looking in the building here after he peeled the floor off, and they were having a fit because they didn't know what the sign actually meant. And this is one of the construction engines used in the construction of the Valparaiso Northern. I think it's a Brooks engine. It looks like a Brooks engine. Supposedly, it fell into the water and was never recovered. And it sank down into the silt. We have kettle lakes around the northern part of, the northern part of the county. which were the remnants of the glaciers that melted. And the weight of the ice created these deep lakes. Some of them are pretty deep. Some of them have areas that are 60 and 70 feet deep. And supposedly this engine is down there. When I was a kid, I went swimming where I was told where it was, and I found a pipe, but I think it was an overflow pipe that the Corps of Engineers put in at some point. Anyway, I think this is just a great picture because it you got the bunting and you got the grumpy old men, and it looks kind of cool. And guys, that's it.
All right, thanks, Ken. Good job.
Thanks, Ken. Good
Yeah.
program.
Thank you.
I'd rehearse a little bit more. I will do that next time.
No worries. Very good. Well, next week we have Doug Harding is going to be presenting on the yard that he's adding to his railroad. I think it's 18th Street or something like that. And so that'll be that. I just got in the mail a thumb drive from Mont Switzer of 9 presentations that he has agreed to give, not all in one night, don't worry. But as long as I advance the slides for him, and so that's coming down the road. So we'll have a lot of Mont Switzer over the next 12 months. But anyway, that's the schedule. And so we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week. And thanks for joining us. Have a great Thursday.
All right.
Okay, take care,
And
Greg.
Thank
Everybody.
you. So long.
And I'm
Bye-bye.
going to take
Thanks
all my
again, Ken.
answers and put them in number order.
Thanks,
Good
Ken.
job. All right,
Make them in
bye-bye.
one pile. See you guys.